Okay, we'd like to begin today by acknowledging that here in Salt Lake City, we are located on land which is named for the Ute tribe and is the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. We recognize and respect the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. Additionally, we are utilizing the technology of Zoom, which is headquartered in San Jose, California, on the traditional lands of the Ohlone peoples. We pay our respects to the current and past elders of all these lands for their continued stewardship. We also must acknowledge that the prosperity of what we call the United States has depended on the labor of enslaved peoples. Rather than simply speak these words, we encourage all of us to consider donating to organizations like the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, Campaign Zero, and the NAACP. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brooke Horsch, and I'm the Executive Director of Utah Presents. I am a white woman with a lot of gray hair. I'm wearing clear glasses and a striped shirt, and I'm in a room that is very obviously my closet. I'm so glad you've all joined us today. Utah Presents is a multidisciplinary presenter at the University of Utah, and we're thrilled to be convening our second session in the Artists Elevated, Discussing Equity and Creativity in the Mountain West series. Artists Elevated was inspired by the brilliant and collaborative work of Creating New Futures, a national conversation led by dance artists of color from across the country. As we witnessed those conversations, we realized that we needed to both expand them to address other disciplines and contract them to be more specific to our region, the Mountain West. You can find future session information on the Utah Presents website, and we'd love for you all to help us spread the word so as many folks as possible can join us for future live sessions or to view the prior and today's recorded session. I'd also like to thank our key partners, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, the College of Fine Arts at the University of Utah, the Salt Lake City Arts Council, and Utah Humanities, all of which help us make this programming happen, particularly by valuing the artists involved and helping us to pay them for their participation, time, and labor. Okay, so a few Zoom logistics. Today's session will start with introductions and a conversation led by our moderator. And then for the last part of the session, we will share any questions you all have with our moderator and panelists so that they can answer your questions. You can feel free to post those questions at any time as they pop into your head in the Q&A section of Zoom. You can find that section at the bottom of your screen all the way to the right. It's different than the chat area. Also, I really encourage you to use positive affirmations. I think one of the hardest shifts to this virtual space is the lack of auditory affirmation from an audience. So let's show our support for this cohort and these amazing folks by holding them up via the chat feature. Finally, this is being recorded, so please check back at the website for the link to share with folks who could not make it today. And one more thing, we had arranged for interpreters for today's session, and unfortunately, there's been a bit of a scheduling issue, so we will be closed captioning for today, and you can find the closed caption area of Zoom right next to the Q&A session, also at the bottom on the right hand of your screen. So I know you guys didn't come and log in today to hear so much from me, so I'm really pleased now to turn over the time to our moderator, Micah Espinoza. I'm so thankful that Dr. Espinosa was willing and available to support the Artist Elevated series. Micah is an Arizona-based interdisciplinary performing artist, activist, teacher, voice, speech, and dialect coach who has performed and taught globally. She's an associate professor at Arizona State University, a master teacher of Fitzmaurice voice work, and the director of the Global Outreach for FV Institute, an award-winning editor for the books Monologues for Latino Actors and Scene Book for Latinx Actors, an affiliate artist with performance art collective La Pocha Nostra, and her scholarship, artivism, and creative research all seek to challenge systems of inequity and Eurocentrism. Thanks again for joining us, and it's all yours, Dr. Espinoza.
Oh, well, it's just Micah Espinoza. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much. Bienvenidos. Welcome to Arts Elevated Theater, discussing equity and creativity in the Mountain West. I'm Micah Espinoza, she, her, hers, and I'd like to begin with gratitude and recognition that I am on the Hohokam people's traditional lands, now known as Mesa, Arizona. I have long dark hair, and I'm wearing a blue dress. Youngest daughter of Mary Louise Proctor and Manuel Gregorio Espinosa, my mother was an orphan who experienced severe poverty and trauma, and my father was a dark-skinned Mexicano who came to the United States in search of the American dream. I am a product of both of their experiences, and this has helped me understand that oppression comes in many forms. I am uniquely Arizona, a Chicana from the borderlands with a border Pocha consciousness. My identity informs my choices to actively challenge inequality in my teaching and in my performance artistry and the initiatives I create and support. So I'm thrilled to be the moderator for today, for this fantastic panel and this forward-thinking arts organization. I will call on each artist and they will introduce their work. A tradition started at the last Arts Elevated panel on dance to deflect people's tendency to speak for artists. I then have a series of questions for the panelists, and we'll see how far we get. I ask that we begin today with a breath and to listen. Listen to the sounds in your space. Maybe you hear an air conditioner or a car going by. And now listen to your heart and see what's resonating with you today. I feel the weight of the coming election, the calcified institutional racism of universities, police brutality, the grief and outrage of over 200,000 deaths, and an administration that has turned its back on our nation. We've only to listen to a presidential debate to see that our leaders have lost their capacity to listen to each other. So I deeply commit today to listen with patience, curiosity, and care. And I invite you to do the same. Thank you, panelists, producers, and audience for taking the time to listen to the rich knowledge of these artists, to their obstacles, to the things that they have encountered, and how we can better support them. To begin our discussion, I'd like to invite Camille Washington, Idris Goodwin, Reagan Linton, and Adriano Cabral.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Camille Washington, she, her, and I am in Ogden, Utah. I want to acknowledge the Ute, Paiute, Goshute, and Shoshone people who have stewarded this land throughout generations and pay my respect, my deepest respect, to elders both past and present. I am currently, and since its inception, the co-director of Good Company Theater, which is the only Black-owned and operated theater in the state of Utah. And I also work as box office and marketing manager for Onstage Ogden, which is a 70-year-old classical performance presenter. I came to theater very indirectly. I grew up in a very artistic family as a secondary source. So both of my parents were makers, but they had traditional jobs in medicine and the military. And we were always encouraged to go through and get a college education and figure out what we were going to do. My introduction to theater came through the church, and then also through my studies in undergraduate and graduate school. I studied art history and for my bachelor's degree, and then exhibition and museum studies for my Master of Arts degree. And with the intention of fully becoming kind of a visual arts curator and administrator. And then I got a great fellowship at the Walker Arts Center, a 2-year fellowship to work on this project of diversity inclusion in these spaces. And after that, I was dumped into the recession and kind of had to reevaluate what my direction would be. So I moved from Minneapolis, where the Walker Arts Center was or is, and I came home to live with my family. And my sister is a performing artist. She's an actor and a singer, and had for a long time been toying with this idea of building a theater company of people of our peers in Utah, where we grew up and where we both live now. And I just so happened to be kind of floating around. And I decided to help with the administrative end of building this theater, which initially was just going to be pop-up performances a few times a year that would ultimately coalesce into something more formal. But we had the opportunity to get a space in Ogden, Utah, and have a home base for what has become Good Company Theater. And our focus is eclectic performances and events, foregrounding the relationship between, or the dynamic relationship between artists and spaces. And so we've moved from our original space, which was in a 1,200 square foot walk up. It was above a sex shop that's still there in downtown Ogden. And we're now in a 3,200 square feet space with a studio. And what we do is plays and musicals. We've done several world premieres. We've done over 37 productions. And then in that process, kind of being kind of grassroots and organic, I started playwriting, mostly for cost-effective reasons. It's cheaper to do your own work than to pay for rights. And so I started dabbling in playwriting about 6 years ago. And then this last year, I actually had an original play produced by a local professional theater company for the first time. It's called Odamite, and thank you. And it won the David Ross Fetzer Foundation Award for Emerging Artists. So I do a little bit of everything, but I mostly consider myself a facilitator. I definitely come from an academic and administrative background. So the way that I influence a space is to facilitate artists, actors, performers, and to create the space for them to produce. Thank you.
Idris.
Hello, everyone. My name is Idris Goodwin, he, him, his, broadcasting from Colorado Springs, Colorado, unceded territory of the Ute. Let's see, what else can I tell you? So I'm the director of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center at Colorado College. And this is where it gets really confusing, is that I taught at Colorado College in the Department of Theater and Dance for about 6 years. And then, and I left to become the artistic director of a youth theater company in Louisville, Kentucky called Stage One, because I was really interested in, creating impact in the civic space, creating impact for a whole city. I'm really passionate about theater for young audiences, or what I like to call theater for new audiences. And I've done a lot of playwriting in that regard, and I'm part of the TYA-USA board. But then the Colorado College, there was an alliance with the Fine Arts Center, Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center, which is a 100-year-old institution that houses a theater, an art museum, and an art school. And then they merged with the college. And so then the opportunity to become the director of that came up, and I had to throw my hat in the ring, because it aligns all the things that I'm passionate about, which are, performing arts, visual arts, arts education on a college campus. So I came back earlier this summer in the midst of this pandemic. And so the thing that was very enticing, it's a theater, it's a museum, it's an art school, all of those are currently closed to the public. But in doing that, it's helped us, it's given us time to focus on, look at our values and look at what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and giving us time to really focus. And in that time, we definitely started exploring in the digital space, and thinking about how can we encourage artists of our region to collaborate. How do we double down on our region more so in the stories that have gone uncovered in this part of the country, and also begin to reconcile, unpack, and deal with the less than the things that have gone down in the arts in this part of the country, the false narratives that the arts have played into and contributed to. How do we reconcile that and undo that and get on course for another 100 years? So similar to Camille, playwriting and writing in the page is primarily what I'm known for, but I think that sounds spot on. I really identify with that, about facilitating and really creating platforms and creating possibilities, and taking an idea from a seed of a notion and being like, no, absolutely. Like, we're going to do that. Like, we're totally going to do that. We're going to do it in 3 weeks from now. It's going to be on a Thursday, and it's going to happen. We're going to make it happen. And you should talk to this person and this person and this person. And then beyond that, it's like, okay, now how do we do that consistently? How do we get known for that? And so I see it as a weird sort of extension of writing, where you're sort of like writing in real time. You're like writing in real life, some of the same kind of skills. So that's me. It's good to be here.
Great. Hi, everybody. I think I'm next. My name's Reagan Linton. I am currently on the traditional homelands of the Ute, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Apache, otherwise known colonially as Denver, Colorado. I am a white middle-aged woman currently wearing a kind of pinkish sweater and with unnatural highlights in my hair, sitting in front of a kitchen, and thrilled to be here with these other artists today. I'm currently artistic director of Family Theater Company in Denver, and I'll say a little bit about how I got here. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and went westward, so I spent most of my time in the Mountain West, or Far West, known as California. Mostly doing theater and also other disciplines. I trained in my master's study in social work, which I found was the best possible training I could have gotten for being in a theater environment and doing the work that we're all doing. And I also navigated the world initially on 2 legs as a bipedal human, and then in college at age 20, transitioned to a wheelchair after a car accident. So I think just in terms of my identity and how I show up in this space, that is very much a part of the work that I do around non-traditional narratives, non-traditional humans, bucking the kind of monocultural norm that we've established in our country, in our art space, all of that, and including thinking about how we transform those spaces to be more inclusive of humans of all different identities. Family is a disability affirmative theater company, one of the few in the country. It was originally known as the Physically Handicapped Amateur Musical Actors League, hence the acronym. Now we just go by Family because a lot of those terms don't apply anymore, or not our preferred terms. And it is a company that produces main stage, professional quality plays, musicals, and original work. And also now web series that we've added that they all cast actors with disabilities across the spectrum, physical, cognitive, intellectual, emotional, in all of the productions. And we've also expanded our work into not just actors, but also how are we making all different parts of the artistic environment inclusive in terms of technical production spaces, design spaces, all of that. So I think that's about the extent of my introduction for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. Hi, everybody. My name is Adriano Cabral. I go by Audie. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. And I am zooming in right now from the ancestral, current, and future lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, and Washoe people, colonially known as Reno, Nevada. I am a white and mixed race, non-binary person with curly hair, wearing a teal polo, aqua teardrop earrings, and green translucent glasses in front of a charcoal gray sheet. I am artistically, I identify as an actor, a dialect coach, an intimacy choreographer, a director, and a writer. I received my Bachelor's of Arts in Musical Theater from Rhode Island College and my MFA in Theater Performance from Arizona State University. I am currently the Professor of Voice and Movement at the University of Nevada in Reno. I'm a board member of Reno Little Theater, the longest running theater company in the state of Nevada, and a board member with the Voice and Speech Trainers Association. I am also a certified teacher of Fitzmaurice voice work, Knight Thompson speech work, and a master Reiki healer and teacher. My research and creative activity circles around LGBTQIA plus inclusive training methods, developing ways of working with performance of sexuality, gender, and doing so in a way that is inclusive of our community, that doesn't reinforce a negative feminine or masculine binary, and actually engages with the broader galaxy of gender expression, gender performance, and sexual orientation. I am the co-author of the text, it's a long title and I always get it wrong. Here's How to Teach Voice and Communication Skills to Transgender Women. Published through Plural Publishing. This is a manualized program for speech and early career speech and language pathologists that are interested in beginning offering transgender voice services. I co-authored that text with speech language pathology professors here on my campus at University of Nevada, Reno, Abby Olaszewski and Selah Sullivan. In 2017, I think it was. Yeah, I think that's an abrupt stop. That's the stuff I want to share right now. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for those introductions. And some of you already addressed our first question. So you can either skip or you can just allow, you can add to it. So why did you either decide to stay in the Mountain West, or did you decide to center your work now here? And how does that work reflect your intersectional identities? Why don't we, is there somebody who'd like to begin, or would you like me to just pick someone? Great, Camille.
Well, I think that what is so unique about Utah in particular, but also about the Mountain West, is that it occupies this kind of broader US cultural non-space that allows for experimentation, that really allows for you to take risks that maybe in other regions you couldn't. It's slightly cheaper here, although that's changing all the time, for spaces. And then also, I think, and this is something that I found just living in a variety of regions in this country, people are hungry, audiences at least here are hungry to be taken seriously as consumers and as audience members with a relationship with the work that they're seeing. And a lot of notions of theater as entertainment disallow that. And so I've found that we've had a really good space to kind of fill in that way, to challenge audiences, and a more traditional large-scale blockbuster notion of what theater can be.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Yeah, that's been my experience too. Is I think there is just a deeper well here. I just think that this is a part of the world that is so critical to actually the American identity. I've written a lot about this part of the country. I actually wrote a play for Oregon Shakespeare Festival about that was set in Utah a couple of years ago called The Way the Mountain Moved, and I did a lot of research. And so my affinity and understanding of the history and also the present has deepened a lot. But similarly, like living out here previous and then again, and my wife is and her whole family are from New Mexico, and so I have a whole history there as well. So the whole I-25 corridor I have a lot of experience and connection to, and there's just a lot here. There's a lot of people here. There's a lot of different kinds of people. There's a lot of deep history, a lot of just horrible, terrible American history that has to be reconciled. They just pulled down the Obelisk, I can't even say it. They put some racist ass monument in Santa Fe Plaza that's been there forever. They just pulled that down. But it's like been there forever, and people are like, oh my God, but the tourism, what's gonna happen to the tourism, right? It's like as if everyone was coming for that thing. So I just think that there's just a ton of stories here, and there's a lot of different walks of life here, and there's a potential for serious impact. And this is, and people in the West, the American West is international. Like it is internationally beloved, but also internationally misunderstood. And, and I think particularly when we start the newly, what I feel is the newly renewed and coming and soon to be growing indigenous, like movement of indigenous representation that is on the that is coming. This part of the country in particular is going to be very critical to that narrative, to enhancing and deepening that narrative and creating platforms and opportunities for members of that community to really get the mic, you know what I'm saying? To really get the mic and say it in their own words. Here's what it is, here's what we want, here's where we're going. And the rest of us to really rally around that and say, absolutely, we concur. And here's how we're prepared to get involved as well. So I'm all about the arts as the arts in coalition building. And I think, in the West, you find everybody, everyone's got a narrative that crosses this place. And so, for me, it's an exciting place to be in a moment like we're in right now.
Thank you. Reagan.
I'll maybe just add, personally, the truth is I'm still out here because of need in a variety of ways. I had really started exploring my career as an actor and, artist, and then was called upon by family to come back and become artistic director, which was not my plan at all. It kind of found myself there. But I really, the reason that I have stayed the last few years is because I feel family really does an extraordinary kind of work that is not done elsewhere. And also with the history of the West, disability rights really originated in the West. And part of that, I think, is because philosophically and also geographically, there's more, the assets that are necessary for accessibility and for adaptation are space, and you have space in the West, and you have openness, and everything is newer. And so I think a lot of those qualities have allowed family and accessibility to be kind of more fully realized in the West. Not to say that the East doesn't do it, or the South or the North, but I think there are unique opportunities like Camille and Idris spoke to in terms of the West and possibility. It's really like the frontier. So I think we have unique possibilities out here in the West that I have found, particularly from an access and disability perspective, aren't necessarily opportunities elsewhere.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all are amazing. I just I'm fangirling over here a little bit and really excited that this is being recorded so that I can watch it back again later. Just needed to get that out first. The things, I want to be fully honest, the things that brought me out to the Mountain West were, I think, necessity as well. I have family out here in Reno. Sorry, I just saw the chat. My family out here in Reno, UNR is a Research One institution. that provides the support for me to be able to do the creative and scholarly work that I want to be able to do. So the fact that family and this institution were over here was definitely the start of what got me to come here. But the things that keep me here are absolutely the mixed political landscape, I think, is really unique about the Reno, Nevada area. I'm the child of a Marine. We bounced around a lot, but predominantly on the East Coast and East-South Coast. So it was North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, just kind of bouncing back and forth between those three until going to high school in Japan for 2 years, which was awesome. I was an angsty teenager and did not appreciate it at the time. So I think being able to be out here and see the mixed perspectives and mixed political landscape that exists in this region is really exciting to me. I get to have fruitful conversations with people that I align myself with and with those that I disagree with in a way that I don't think I had back in Virginia and where I was, at least in North Carolina and South Carolina. I also love the expansive geographical and geological landscape. It is gorgeous out here in the West. We talk about this, or we mentioned this in one of our earlier meetings about the Mountain West being an area that people just fly over and don't really get to spend much time in. I got Lake Tahoe right over there. I got Burning Man and Black Rock City 4 hours away from here. I got deserts, forests, water, anything that serves my desire, I think. And that's really exciting to me. It's also a crossroads. Yes, we got it all, Darby. Another element of how this, how my intersectional identity connects to this particular region. I'm a mixed race, able-bodied, queer, middle-class, trans non-binary, US-born witch in their 30s. This particular area, Reno, Nevada, is a crossroads. This is where mountains and desert and water and land intersect. And there's something magical about that land. There's something really unique about the energy here. And I see that in every summer when the folks come driving through to get their way to Burning Man. The culture of radical self-expression and radical self-love that exists in this city is absolutely one of the reasons why I'm here and why I stay.
Well, that is a perfect way for us to transition to our next question, which is our region is one of the most ecologically diverse, but it's also one of the most ecologically diverse, and it's also one of the least demographically diverse. I believe the numbers are like in Utah, the Black population is 2%. Is that right, Camille? Yeah, you're like, so how can we empower? It's less than that. Okay. That's hard to wrap my brain around. How can we empower interconnectedness, interconnected ecologies to break down inequitable systems that no longer work? And I'm thinking specifically about the theater, casting, auditioning, tours, what's working and what's not. Idris, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah. Well, so first off, you know, I think what's really dope about being on this call with Camille and Reagan is they both run companies that are very specific to specific communities, right? And so that's one is key, is just the visibility and creating a rally point and a meeting point for, you know, key demographics in parts of the, you know, in parts of the country. I think that, and I don't make any bones about this, like the current construct of theater, performing arts in the United States, by and large, is paralyzed. And the reason it's paralyzed is because it was built inflexibly and it was not built to serve communities, by which I mean, you know, this idea of what Mike Daisy says is like slingshotting freeze-dried actors from New York to your town, and then a director flying in, and you building this thing and basically saying like, here's what they like in New York, here's what they like in New York, Reno. What does that do for Reno? How does that build the cultural fabric of Reno? How does that feed Reno? And I think for me, where my head is, and particularly when it comes to race, I'll just say right now, like, I don't trust demographic pie charts and stuff like that. So I actually believe there's probably a lot more Black people in Utah than what's been reported. I just don't believe them, just because I feel like we're invisible. People of color are invisible anyway, and a lot of us be under the radar anyway. But in researching the play, there were these two characters in the play, and Wait a Mountain Move, my Utah play, as I call it. There were two Black characters who came along with the Latter-day Saints in the 1850s, in that initial first wave that was fleeing. I think it was either Illinois or Missouri, I don't remember, after there was this violent murder of Joseph Smith. And so there were Black folks in that caravan initially that came with that initial wave of Latter-day Saints in the 1850s. So, we've been everywhere, that everybody, the same, what I mean? Like, we've been everywhere. But really what we're talking about is inclusion and representation, is that, people stay where they feel like they can prosper. And so I think building, to me, I think right now is about building these safe havens, these safe spaces, these inclusive spaces. And, but then also I think for larger institutions to make it very clear that, all communities are not just welcome, but are essential to the future of their civic responsibility, right? Like, if I'm a civic organization, I suck as a civic organization if I don't have map representation of my whole region throughout, in all different aspects and ways, despite demographic disparity, despite, okay, if there's only 1% of Black folk, in the area, then there need to be 1% of Black folk in the building, you know what I mean? In the audiences, on the walls, so that's what we're shooting and striving for. But I think in this COVID moment, I think about this every day. If we go back to doing stuff the same way, then shame on us, because we let it happen. Because this is our opportunity and our chance to say, you know what? There was problems before the virus. The virus was just a flashlight. The virus was just illuminating the tomfoolery that we just endured and normalized for far too long.
And also, just to continue on that, I agree completely about underreporting. I mean, we see the measures to erase us right now with limiting access to the census. Like, this is an ongoing struggle to be seen. But also, I think when I think of the West and the movement of people, I think of these towns like Colorado Springs, like Reno, like Ogden, which is a railroad town and an industry town, had a big part in the world wars and military industrialization. That these are spaces that people have always moved and always been thinking through lots of demographics, lots of different people, lots of contested spaces, challenged spaces, but then open communication. And so in Ogden particularly, there is more of a reception to and the idea that there can be other voices, because there always have been, like you're saying, Idris, like there always have been, with those first so-called pioneers coming through and laying claim to these lands, there have always been a multitude of voices. And it's also been a way for, at least for my family in particular, I'm Black biracial, and my father's family was from the South, and the military was a way to get out. And there's an Air Force base here, and that is a huge benchmark of kind of the historical Black community in Utah. And Ogden used to be the center of that culture until kind of the movement of the space and the suburban sprawl kind of shifted that. And so those are all things that come into play all the time in the way that we think about producing theater and how we occupy a space and the spaces that we are interested in as theater artists and as interested parties in being mindfully from a location.
I'm back. My internet went away, so I came right by the router. Reagan, were you about to speak?
Glad you're back.
Yeah, me too. I was like, where'd I go?
Peter. Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to what's already been said. I often kind of, my own personal way of working is to like drill down to very basic philosophical tenets. And I think what while like casting, auditioning, all of those other pieces and whose narrative are we telling, all of those are important, but none of those are actually going to take hold until we erase this culture of fear that we're all living in. Because I think what theater and the arts have always been is a place for inquiry and curiosity. But if we're afraid and we feel like our own narratives are being threatened in some way, and I speak largely, especially around, white narratives that have been the dominant, but for some reason we are starting to think, that our narrative is being threatened, and therefore we kind of have to like build these walls around our white heteronormative, able, whatever those narratives are, then we're not going to be allowing space and curiosity and inquiry for other narratives in that theatrical artistic space. And so I think we have to get back to a place where the arts can be those safe spaces for where we want to come to learn beyond our own experience, and where we don't feel so threatened that we can't allow space for saying, you know what, here's where I don't have that experience. I don't know what it's like to be a first generation immigrant. Geez, I'm really curious about that. I want to know more. And so how do where are those spaces where I can kind of feed on those narratives and feed on filling up my own limited knowledge base and filling the holes. So I think there's so many different approaches, and a lot of it is contextual, and what is a particular community's approach, what is their history, what is their, and honoring that at the same time as we're saying, yeah, and let's get beyond ourselves, let's get beyond what we know, and returning to a place where that's not fear-based. There's no threat in that.
Absolutely. And I think to follow that, developing the knowledge base, this starts in education. There is no reason why this day and age where Shakespeare, Stanislavski, and Strasberg needs to be the foundational trainings in every theater program. That's absurd. My university is slowly working towards becoming a Hispanic serving institution. So why am I teaching my actors in my Shakespeare and Heightened Reality class only how to analyze Shakespeare? I don't. I teach Jose Rivera. I teach Susan Laurie Parks. I teach Luis Alfaro. I teach artists who have poetic language and let my students learn the poeticism through that lens, rather than forcing them to only learn this old archaic text from 400 years ago. And in your actor training, I am so glad that people are finally looking at and paying attention to the work of Dr. Luckett and Tia M. Schaefer. This book should be on every theater practitioner's desk. Black Acting Methods is brilliant. Sorry, product plug. Let me put that away. And so figuring out ways of incorporating training methods with your students that represent the whole of who they are, that doesn't force your students to erase their identity to fit into a white Eurocentric a performance pedagogy that probably isn't relevant for us anymore. I think the more that we can do that, the more that we're looking at bringing non-Western performance practices into the classroom, global perspectives in the classroom, that your students are going to go out into the world and be doing this work for us. These changes will be made when we introduce our students to this work. So yes, I say this knowing that we are hosted by University of Utah, knowing that I am a representative of UNR, that it is our job as educators to make sure that we are doing this work so that people that are operating these wonderful theaters like the Goodman Theater Company and Family Theater Company aren't being forced to do it all by themselves. They're trying to change the culture of the industry within the industry. Your students are the industry. If you get them on board early, then the industry that they grow into will change with them. Start with the students.
Thank you. Yeah. And yet the West has a strong history of Shakespeare festivals. And some of the Shakespeare festivals have been doing some excellent work as far as equitable practices, and others not so much. Others are still on that journey. This brings me to, what are some of the equitable engagement strategies that you have employed or you want to employ in your communities, especially in these places where you are seen or maybe treated as the other? So the one theater company, the one person of color on the faculty.
I'll start. It's an ongoing struggle for Good Company Theater because we don't have a traditional rooting in African American theater as as its own entity that's Black focuses on stories by Black playwrights, that mid-20th century Cobra, Black liberation movements type of idea of Black theater. We are a Black-owned theater, and I pay respect to that, and we do as well. But it's been a struggle to try to establish that having an artistic direction that is informed by this history, by people who are, living embodiments of the legacy, can bring a richness to other programming as well, that we occupy an entirely different space than just being the theater that does August Wilson and Rep or something like that. And that's limiting. And it's also a response to the space. There is such the demographics here, for better or worse, are what they are. And it's not, I don't think we have never wanted to feel encumbered by this. And then also we see ourselves as administrators and artistic voices in multiple ways. And that is something that we try to do as I recently learned, behind the table as a phrase. We don't really consider having a table in that way as a production unit, but just giving opportunity to different voices in multiple capacities on creative teams, not just on stage, and then also considering the way that we don't have a traditional way that we formulate a season. It's usually in response to the political, cultural environment as we see it. It's pretty responsive. And I think that comes from the adaptability of being a Black person in a majority white space, as women in male dominated spaces. And as it informs what we do from the ground up. And so that has been an education, not a formal education with students per se and an instructor, but a way to educate a broader community that we exist in, a theater community, that we can comment on more than just ourselves, and that what we do is more expansive than that, and that has value.
Thank you.
I'll maybe say that, this has been a constant struggle for family because there are all of these different forces and pulls, right? And so it's constantly like, how are we going to make the greatest impact? And particularly if you are kind of an identity in a sea of a sea that is not necessarily representing or including or, you know, making visible that identity. For a number of years, family, you know, also has been approached about, oh, well, come to us, you know, come to bring a tour. And I think we've time and time again realized making our core stronger is going to make us better. And if people want to see us, they can come to us. So really saying, we are here, we are where we're founded, and we're going to stay here, and we're going to continue to try to make that foundation stronger. It's kind of like if you think of weightlifting, and if you have a really heavy weight, you know, the farther out you hold it from your body, the more difficult it is to hold it, rather than if you're keeping it close to your core. And so I think we've continued to think about what are the strategies where we build ourselves here. We build our practices. And if people want to come to us and want to learn from us, great. We're absolutely willing to share, but we're not going to diminish our resources by continually going out to other people. Now, I say that also given that we have really strong outreach programs, we constantly do that. But I think it's important to remember to, Camille mentioned roots, you know, constantly to come back to your roots, to come back to your foundation and build that and make that stronger. You know, focusing on number one before you go out to number 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, everybody out beyond you. So I think that's one thing that, you know, and I think personally as an artist, I try to do that as well. If I'm not feeling confident and grounded in my own personal approach to change, equity, you know, my own personal philosophy, then I don't feel like I'm going to be good at representing that for anybody else or to any other communities beyond myself. So I guess coming back to the core, coming back to number one, always first.
I'll jump in and say every single theater company, Department of Theater, Performing Arts, should be reading We See You White American Theater's list of demands. There is a phenomenal 31-page document, a love letter put together by artists of color across this country that have given you specific action steps for developing more equitable engagement strategies in everything that you do. That 31 pages looks daunting. Read it, skim it, read it again. Darby asks in the chat, it is called the We See You White American Theater List of Demands. You can find them at WSYWAT.org. Literally lists out action steps for institutions of higher education. Here's what you need to do to develop more equitable practices. Oh, it is We See You, my bad, not just the letters. It walks through, this is how you should be working with unions. This is what you should be doing in the rehearsal room. This is how you should be staffing your board. This is how you should be talking to your fundraisers and your funders. The work is already out there for us. The strategic plan is already created for us. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So look at the work that's already being done, first and foremost. And then invite underrepresented voices to your table. I think I've been thinking a lot about community. How do you define community? Is your community just the physical scope that you are able to reach out to right now? And when we're living in a pandemic with many quarantine restrictions, your community probably feels extremely small. We have something right here, right now, that keeps our community large. There is no reason with the advent of Zoom and everybody's newfound ability to do remote learning to bring in artists of color or artists of different ability into your classroom or into your theater company to join as a guest artist, to offer a workshop, to talk to your board members about why it's important to be doing this work. I think it's super important right now for all of us that are looking at how do we increase equity, diversity, and inclusion in our work, that you are not alone. To do EDI alone would be counterintuitive to the I part of that. You are not alone. Look at the resources you have, call one of us, and get to it. I mentioned earlier global perspectives in education. You don't have to be a person of color or a person who identifies as diverse to teach global perspectives in your classroom. You can start by introducing your students to plays outside the Western European canon. You can have conversations about the acting methods that you're teaching them right now and why you're teaching them right now. I want to give a quick shout out to Micah's colleague and one of my former teachers, Oscar Gimer, who's an amazing Taino man who taught our Shakespeare class through the lens of Native American performance practices. That was revolutionary and life-changing for me as someone who felt there needed to be a spiritual connection to the art that you create. And that was the first time I had ever met someone who wasn't telling me, Shakespeare is Shakespeare, you do it as Shakespeare. Don't look at it as anything other than the poetry that it is. Think outside the box, and more voices are gonna wanna join you.
I love how we're all shaking our heads. We're all like, yes, yes. Idris, do you have something to add to this?
No, I mean, you know, echoes and snaps and all that to everything said. I mean, you know, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. You know, just because of the nature of our institution, you know, but we're striving towards equity, and you know, for me, it just looks like you know, it just is a reflection, you know, reflects a microcosm of in multiple ways, you know, in terms of staff, in terms of board, in terms of, you know, what's on the stages, what's on the walls, who the artists are, who's in our cohort. Like, you just want it at every level. This beautiful sort of organic ecosystem, but that takes work. You know, it takes sometimes inorganic steps in order to, you know, it's like to use the garden metaphor, right? You got to do a lot to have a good garden. You know, you got to build the boxes, you got to get the soil, you got to make sure it's healthy, you know, boom, boom, boom. But once you do all that, you know, the soil can do what it's going to do on its own. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And this is to Adriano's point, it's there's a lot of resources. That's the best thing about it. There's a lot of people who have created the maps. It's very clear.
So that takes me to a question that is in the Q&A, and I can tie it into one of mine. You know, what does equity look like in your community? And one of the questions for all the panelists is, once this is all over, how do you think theater and art will look back on this time period? What sort of art will come out of all this? So, you know, we're not just in one pandemic, we're in two pandemics. We're in a pandemic of racial justice right now. And I know all of us have been on a lot of panels and doing a lot of talking and doing a lot of Zooming. And now what are the next steps? What are we striving for?
Well, I'll just quickly say, sorry, Camille, you can go ahead. I'll just quickly say, like, by and large, the regional theater system has been sort of more or less in some weird mutation, following the sort of WPA, you know, regional theater idea, right? Which comes out of coming out of a crisis, coming out of a Great Depression, New Deal. I'm going to stimulate the economy, put artists to work. There'll be regional theaters all over the country that will employ actors, blah, 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 blah. More or less, I mean, we getting into the 80s and 90s, you get into the capital campaign for the building movement. You're heavy with subscribers, you know, the Clinton years, you know, the dollars are flowing and everybody's like showing up in their furs, and it's a good old time in the American theater, right? But that's where you start to see the big disparity. And you also start to see the you know, the shrinking and dying of, you know, particularly Black theaters, but culturally specific theaters, because now the regional theaters, they spend all their money from capital campaigns. So now they got to go after some grants, and they're like, no, we'll do that Black stuff too, you know, once a year in February. Right. And so then, you know, the other, you know, so similarly, my point is, I think this has the potential to be a moment like, from where the WPA came from. This is like our depression moment right now. And so what we need is, what is that New Deal thing for artists, right? And, Howard Sherman put out this great, I can't believe I'm about to say this, Howard Sherman, the great New York-based theater journalist, put out a great series of tweets, but really about what's happening in terms of the funding. And he's talking about the funding disparities between what he's seeing in the UK and what he's seeing here. Be an arts superhero, this hashtag that's going around. There's a major conversation that has to happen about how the arts are viewed by the government civically as a priority. And before we have any we've got to get into that. We've got to push on that, and we have got to get this society to stop thinking about us as pork, or as extracurricular, or as that's, we gotta push that. Like, we are critical and key and core, especially for a country that is as divided, that is confused, that is terrified, has so much anxiety, that is separated. Like, the arts are critical to our sanity moving forward, and us coming back together in some small ways, as a nation. So that's what we're in now. Like, we're going to look back at this moment either as, oh, this was the Great Depression and then we had a New Deal, or we're going to look back at it and be like, hey, remember that weird time when we were all on video? Anyway, I got to go. I got tickets for, this, this play with no Black people in it about a living room that I have to hurry up and go see because I got comps, whatever.
Yeah, I guess I keep coming back frequently to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this nice little pyramid of oh, well, if you have your toilet paper and your food and I'm not saying that toilet paper and food are not important, but I think something that was reinforced for me over the last several months, and I think for many, is that, okay, we have all those things and now we're sitting in our houses. And now what? What's the point? What's the point? And so I think just remembering that, it's not a pyramid, those spiritual and artistic and all of these other things are crucial for the human experience to feel like we're purposeful and meaningful and doing something in this short amount of existence that actually matters. So yes to Idris and supporting the arts. And then I think in terms of, equity, I think in family, it is about making time and making space. Those are crucial elements of equity, time and space, so that we're not all just racing through everything in our lives and kind of missing this person, that experience, this narrative. We have to slow things down and kind of return to each other as human beings. And then I think really challenging stale narratives. If we've seen it before, why are we putting it up again? What are those narratives because I guarantee you, if you have some sort of scenario where oh, could that piece fit into that could that person be playing that role? Could this narrative be? Yes, the answer is yes. You just have to make it happen. And it probably has happened before. Or if you're looking for that community that you want to engage, they're there. As was pointed out earlier, they're just not visible. You're not seeing them. You're not including them. So I think it's really about pushing ourselves to say, what have we not seen or experienced or heard? What are we not incorporating, and making the space and the time for those things to be present, those people to be visible. And pushing towards that, as opposed to the same thing we've always done over and over.
And I think that, yes, absolutely. And I respond really well to slowing things down. Here in Utah, there has been in the larger theater community a real push to be back on stage, to be presenting things, to be back in the theaters at the risk of everyone's health and well-being. And I think that taking that time to stop and reevaluate is what we will miss from this moment of very few good things that can come out of is this idea of slowing down and reconsidering. And so here, it's so great that you brought up We See You, White American Theater, Adriano, because there has been more of an effort, and it's been artist-led and actor-led, to hold some of the larger professional and university adjacent or funded theaters responsible, and producers responsible for some of these shortcomings that have been just endemic to theater. And that has been, it's been really fascinating to see. And I think it's the opportunity is to be shaking the system up right now in a way that isn't messing with people's financial stability, because at least for where I'm coming from, everything's unstable financially. And so to really challenge what a board looks like, not just a board that you're associated with, but the boards of the theaters that you support, or the funders. What are they funding? What does their outlook look like? How are they responding to the socio-political environment that we're in right now? Responding specifically to BIPOC artists and producers. And I think that, yes, if that is something that comes of this moment, it will be, will be great.
Absolutely. I think it also looks like relationship repair. We need to do some relationship repair, acknowledge the shortcomings that we've had in our past, and then work towards a progressive and more inclusive future. I think when I think about the theater that will come out of the period after this moment, I hope it's not a whole bunch of plays about people stuck in quarantine. I really hope that's not what the plays are. That feels like hella boring. We already did it for
now. Yeah, we're writing those right now. Like write those right now, and then when that vaccine shows up, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
but I think the art that comes out of this is, I hope our plays about that relationship repair is art specifically talking about movements towards anti-racism in our communication practices and how we connect with people around us. I forget which panel it was that I was attending. I think it was from a collective of Boston theater makers, but they talked about your commitment now while you're shut down to developing anti-racist practices and policies in your theater company will make you survive this pandemic. I'm gonna say that again. Committing to anti-racist policies and procedures now during a shutdown will help you survive the pandemic, because you will come back with a larger community. You will come back with people who feel seen and want to be a part of your work. That's part of that relationship repair of saying, hey, we've had an all-white board at this theater company for over 30 years. We're never gonna do that again. That's an easy thing to commit to. There are more qualified artists of color, artists of different ability, artists of diversity across the country than there is work for us to do. There are a lot of people qualified to be doing this work. I say that because I think one of the biggest roadblocks we often get when we begin EDI initiatives in theaters or in institutions is, well, I don't know any Black artists who can join my board. I don't know any qualified Black faculty members to join this position. Then you're not looking hard enough. Like, to be perfectly honest, you're not looking hard enough. Look, he just says right there in chat, that's bullshit. Like, honestly, call it out. It is bullshit.
I mean, can I say this really quickly? The thing I've been saying is there's just a new standard. So I'll use a basketball analogy. People start dunking basketballs in the 50s. The dunk becomes this move in the 50s and 60s. They try to outlaw it for like a while. It doesn't really work out. If you're a player and you don't know how to defend against the dunk, or you can't dunk, you just don't get to play basketball anymore, because that's part of the game now, right? Phil Jackson pioneers the triangle offense, which leads the Chicago Bulls to like 6 championships. If you can't defend against the triangle offense, you just can't play anymore. And so there's just a new standard now. We can get into why and the back and all that, but at the end of the day, if you don't know how to find no people of color, if you don't know how to look beyond your little circle of buddies, you don't get to play. I'm sorry, you just don't, because you just can't keep up, and time is going to have its way with you. So it's not even like somebody's going to show up and say, hey, you don't get, it's just nature will just take its course because you can't keep up. You just can't keep up. And that's how I look at it. Like, forget about your leanings, okay? Just like, even to put it completely shallow, right? We're in a we see you white American theater world. And if you don't take that document serious in some way, and listen, I look at those pages and I take a very deep breath because I'm like, I look at that and I'm like, okay, what of this can I put on layaway? Can I put, item 3, 5, 12, 13, 24 through 30 on layaway? Can I put some on that? And I'll get to that in like 2023. But some of this but you have to at least acknowledge it. You got to have a plan and a track for, and so that's why I think you're saying, I think people get freaked out where they're like, I don't know how. It's like, it's that whole how do you eat an elephant thing. Like, don't just acknowledge it, take it serious and make a plan. If it takes you 20 years, then it takes you 20 years. But you got to at least acknowledge it and understand it's important and look at your values and be like, boom, okay, we're going to strive for this because it's critical. Sorry to steamroll you, but I think about this stuff a lot. Sorry. And listen, there hadn't been a basketball analogy yet. So I'm trying to.
It was needed.
Yeah. We celebrate diversity. So.
Well, Andrew, thank you. Andrew, on stage, Ogden, works with Camille. Thank you for that question that got us all talking. We're coming kind of towards the end of our time here. And of course, we didn't get through all of our questions. I would like to go ahead and throw the questions into the room, though, just so that we can think about them. I was interested in knowing how your creative endeavors align with the Mountain West themes. I think we kind of already addressed some of this, but migration, immigration, climate change, the shifting political landscape. There's something about the stories that are here that are unique to the West, and I think something that we can really offer. I think we've already discussed it, but if somebody feels like they can really address that question or is dying to address it, maybe we could have one person speak to that, to the themes of migration and immigration, and then the shift in political landscape, all the things that are happening here. I know it's the reason I came to Arizona. I came back. I was teaching in Michigan. I always say I left my cushy job and I came out here because I wanted to be I wanted to be where, I was writing about Latinx artists. I wanted to be with Latinx artists, and I couldn't be with Latinx artists as much in Michigan. Would anybody like to speak to that question?
I just want to say I'm from Michigan. Shout out Michigan. But yeah, I know what you mean. Where can I quickly ask where in Michigan?
Yeah, I was at Western Michigan University.
Oh, is that KZoo?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah,
that's all I have to contribute.
Maybe Micah, I'll approach this just from maybe a different direction.
Sure.
Family does not tend to focus on the immigrant experience. However, I think what's important to remember is that there are people with disabilities who have the immigrant experience, and there are immigrants who have the disability experience, that so many of our stories overlap. And I think, again, part of the fear that can come in is like, oh, we need to be doing the immigrant story. We need to be doing the climate change story. We need to be doing, the racial justice story. And those aren't the focus of our work all the time. And, so we just can't do any of them. And, I think like somebody pointed out earlier, we're a constellation of humans. We all have lanes. We all have things that we can focus on. And so making sure that you're doing something, like Idris was saying with We See You, make sure that you might not be doing all 60, 70 of the points right now, but you're doing something. So I guess I just wanted to, I know that's not speaking exactly to what you are saying, but I think as somebody who sometimes has felt, that sense of like failure of, oh, we're not focusing on that story, making sure that we're remembering that those stories overlap. those stories, you know, are definitely intersectional. And and also oppression comes from the same source. And so if you're fighting oppression in one form, you know, you're fighting oppression in those other forms as well. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
I think that's great. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. And actually, Reagan, this is for you. Thinking about families' approach of keeping and maintaining a strong core and not touring, how do you envision engagement across the many miles that exist between the Mountain West communities to share families' expertise and strength?
Yeah, it's an inherent tension. I mean, I think that's why we have tried to develop different strategies, such as putting content online, doing web-based content. You know, this, as somebody pointed out earlier, this creates a whole new frontier and opportunity for us to be able to connect virtually. And then, you know, again, I think family is not the only one that knows how to do this kind of work. You have folks in your communities that are doing it. So who have you not connected with yet? You know, we're obviously happy to connect via virtual or many different forms of technology. But I think it's also looking for who are the folks in your community that are already experts in this work that you just haven't found yet. So, I mean, and then someday we'll have a fully accessible bus that can like cart our actors all over the West, but that hasn't happened yet. So.
And we have, thank you, Reagan. And we have a question for Adriano. And actually this is for any of the panelists, but it comes from Adriano's reference of a culture of radical self-expression. The question is that they would like to hear from any of the panelists about experiences they've had either successfully or unsuccessfully enacting radical self-expression.
I think that's a great question. I will toss out really quick. At the institution, at UNR, with some of my students, when I first started coming into myself, it wasn't met with full open arms right away. I absolutely had students writing in my course evaluations at the end of the semester, Audie's too gay. They talk about the fact that they're gay more often than they should, or they're pushing their gay agenda on me as a student, which is like weird. I don't know how I would do that as a professor of introduction to theater, but whatever, to each their own. And that was my early experiences, I think, at this university, exploring radical self-expression for myself. This year, completely different. I'm gonna do a shout out for my theater, introduction to theater class right now. They're a group of 75 students that I am teaching completely on Zoom, and they are amazing human beings. They have been so welcoming of every single person in the classroom. Everyone feels like they can have an equal voice in the room. And I think that's what happens when you radically accept radical self-expression. Be who you are unapologetically, and the people that will surround you are going to be the ones that will lift you up and that will help you build your community. Do it, do the work. Idris, you were going to say something.
That's great, though. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. I think that's really inspiring, and shout out to you for doing that. I was just going to quickly say that everything that I come out of a hip hop aesthetic and pedagogy and headspace, and more or less that's like kind of how I approach everything philosophically. And the tenet of the basic principle of hip hop is it's a collective sort of art making experience, sort of call and response, a very inclusionary, very community oriented culture that prioritizes the gathering over everything else. So nothing is precious. Copyright laws are not precious. Preservation is not precious. You know, we have our sacred icons and our sacred names, but generally speaking, end of the day, if the folks are gathered and they are vibrant and they are having the time of their lives and they are on the edge of the blade, then then it's successful. So, you know, rap fans, you know, we will go on and on and on about we don't like mumble rap, we don't like this style of rap. But the thing that will end every argument is, but the people mess with it. People mess with it. People rock to it. People dance to it. They doing their thing. You know, it's like, it's the people, it's a very like proletariat type of culture. And it's built upon self-expression. It's built upon individual style as part of within a collective. So a b-boy crew is a crew, and you rep the crew. But every b-boy and b-girl has their own individual style on the floor. Some do top rock really well. Some do floor work very well. Some do power moves very well. And every person has a part to play. And that's pretty much from my whole career as an artist, as an arts leader, as an educator, it's always been based in that idea that we are in conversation, we are in back and forth. I'm there to facilitate the space. I'm like a DJ just trying to get the room warm. Oh, y'all don't like that record? Cool. I pull from this crowd. The dance hall stuff's not doing it for you. Okay, let me pull some of this trap. The trap is not pulling for you. Okay, I'm gonna pull from the objective is to get everybody awake and on that blade's edge, which is to say, like, coming from a sense of urgency and realness and connectivity. No one's phoning it in, because as Mark Bamuthi Joseph would say, if you do not commit to the head spin, you will break your neck.
I've taken that in, that image in. We have another question, but Camille has.
I just want to say one thing. I'm there, Idris, but I think hip hop is slightly leaning to the petite bourgeois, away from the proletariat. That's all I got to say.
To be fair to the rest of our esteemed panelists and the people, and we will sidebar that conversation. But here's the one thing, just a quick little nugget I will just say, because you're right. From a distance, one would think that. But at its core, it will always, meaning, like, perfect example. 2 weeks ago, Saturday Night Live, Megan Thee Stallion is on. Megan Thee Stallion does her song, classy, sassy, ratchet, boom, boom, dinner, right? And then at the end, it turns into this political statement, this indictment, protect Black women. Daniel Cameron is not about that life. And the reason she does that is because that is the contract. Hip hop still requires you to do that. There have been many who have come and gone, who have just been about the flash and lights. I mean, it's in the diaspora, so it's gonna be colorful, it's gonna be shiny, but we invented swag, we invented style. So we're not coming in gowns and we invented that. We like to shine. So, and we shine even in the ghetto. So that's a whole, but I feel you. I mean, you're not wrong, but I just want to say at the end of the day, you can never get too far from the park. You can never get too far from Cohurk. And that's the beauty of it. No matter how high you ascend, Icarus has taught us anything. You can only get so high. But the net is the park jam. Anyway, okay. Sorry, I just did what I said I wasn't going to do. We'll talk.
That's all right. That's all right. We are almost out of time, but I'd love to squeeze just, if somebody could address this. Is anybody doing anything? Here's a question from Ramona. If anyone is doing experiences that are inclusive to immunocompromised audience members, does anybody have any plans for that coming up?
So at Good Company Theater, we've actually done 2 COVID safe runs. Both of them existed we produced them outside of the formal theater space. So one was out kind of storefront style off on the street. We have a studio with large windows, and we seated a small audience of 5 outside of the studio, and then inside the performers would perform, and they were all in their own little bubbles. And then each week we would disinfect the space, and then the next week there would be another performance. So these micro audiences in a completely distanced space. And then we did I'll call it a musical political satire that we closed last weekend. And all of the performers performed on in their separate spaces. So there were 7 performers, and they each had their own space, but then the audience was spread out over a large parking lot. So we actually staged the production. There was no live music, it was all DJ'd. And these are, we're looking at how, as the long winter approaches, how we can continue doing those things and thinking about immunocompromised people, and also just general safety during a really terrible time. But yeah, we've been doing that. And long-term measures, we have, if we had the means, we would do one of the larger kind of airflow studies that have been going on in larger spaces. But mostly in the future, what we're considering are micro performances and audiences.
Well, thank you. Those things all sound wonderful. We are out of time. I thank you so much for this rich discussion. It's been fabulous hanging out with you this afternoon, and I hope we get to do it some other time. I really enjoyed getting to know you all. I hand this off to Brooke, Executive Director of Utah Presents.
Oh my gosh, thank you all so much. I have so many notes and so many questions that I want to ask you. And hopefully some of you have posted your emails in the chat so that people like myself and others, if they want to follow up with you, they can. I would encourage everyone watching to support these artists, and if they're affiliated with organization, to support that organization. I also want to invite everyone, if you've enjoyed this conversation, we have future sessions coming in Artist Elevated. We're also hosting a free public conversation tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time with Nadia Tolokonnikova from Pussy Riot. If you're not familiar with Nadia, she's a phenomenal artist focused on LGBT and feminist issues from Russia. And she's just got an amazing story to share, and we'll be hosting that tomorrow night. And then we're thrilled to be premiering the newly envisioned work of Dancing Earth, a virtual performance creation between Underground and Skyworld in November, and we'd love to have you all witness that beautiful work. Again, thank you to all our panelists, thank you to Micah, our moderator, and thank you to all of you for showing up and sharing this time and space with all these amazing folks. We hope you have a great day, and you get out into that amazing Mountain West landscape that we all enjoy. Bye.